welcome to meeting number 30 of the Special Committee on Canada-China Relations. Pursuant to order of reference of Wednesday, September 23, 2020, the committee is meeting on its study of Canada-China relations. Il s'agit d'une réunion hybride.
This is a hybrid meeting according to the motion passed on January 25th, 2021.
Actually, a fellow maritimer, the Honorable Dominic Cardy, Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development at the Legislative Assembly of New Brunswick, the Government of New Brunswick. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. Please proceed with your opening remarks. You have 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, it's an honor to be able to be part of this conversation around an issue that I think is of great importance for our country at a time of increasing global instability. Very briefly, my particular interest in this subject doesn't just stem from my current position as Minister for Education and Early Childhood Development in New Brunswick, but having worked as a democracy activist in multiple countries around the world, and coincidentally too, Cambodia and Nepal. I happened to be living in those countries at the point when China took an interest in those countries and effectively, economically, and in both cases, functionally, politically colonized them over a very brief period of time in the last decade before last now. When I look at any discussion around China, I think that it's important that we look at the reality of the horrifying headlines that we've seen here in our own country around residential schools in recent weeks. And as we like to say about past sins that our country has experienced, never forget and never again. And in this case, we appear to be doing just that in both cases with China. And not only that, but to be amplifying it. As a massive system of residential schools, internment camps, functionally concentration camps, is rolled out across the hinterland of one of our largest trading partners. And rather than speaking up against this vociferously, making that the centerpiece of our foreign policy, as you would expect a country that led the fight against fascism and for democracy in the Second War, and has been a voice with its soft power in the intervening decades. Instead, we're amplifying that message. And I'm speaking here specifically, not just about our general foreign policy failures, but about the experience of the Confucius Institute, a Chinese Communist Party branch operation operating inside public schools and universities in different places across Canada. Here in New Brunswick, the Confucius Institute gained a foothold back in the late 2000s and expanded to be reaching many thousands of New Brunswick students from both the primary and high school levels over the course of several years. Programs supposedly focusing on culture and language, in many cases included overt political propaganda. This included having elementary school students drawing maps of China that would erase the border with Taiwan, included a denial of the reality of Tiananmen Square, included the disciplining of students who raised questions around China's abysmal human rights record. So these are things that are happening in Canadian schools. So knowing this, and with the background that I had when I became minister in the end of 2018, I resolved to try and end the Confucius Institute's programs in New Brunswick, which resulted in an interesting series of lobbying efforts. The first one with a former premier of New Brunswick, Sean Graham, working as a lobbyist for Chinese interests, attempting me to maintain my relationships with Chinese schools, the Confucius Institutes operating here in the province, and New Brunswick curriculum operated schools operating in China. And then when that didn't work, somewhat surprisingly, the visit of the Consul General of China to my office without any of the normal diplomatic protocols that I'm well aware of from my past life in international politics and diplomacy, who attempted to pressure me into reversing a government decision, including threats of economic retaliations, turning this into a two-nation issue rather than a question of a disagreement over schooling. And that in turn led to members of the Chinese diaspora reaching out to me, expressing grave concern over the fact that their country of birth was reaching its tentacles into not just Canadian politics, but into our education system, which you would hope would be the place where what we would have as Canadian values, no matter how much we may argue around parliamentary and legislative tables across Canada about what that would mean, certainly does not include concentration camps, does not include mass murder, and doesn't include any of the myriad crimes routinely committed by the People's Republic of China and their various apologists supporting them around the world. So I'm looking forward to answering any questions that I can, both specifically about the Confucius Institute's operations here in New Brunswick, the reaction to the decision to cancel those programs, and anything else related to this subject. Thank you so much for the time to be able to appear for this committee.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll now go to our first, before I do that, I gather we may be interrupted once or twice, probably twice tonight throughout the whole meeting, that is, for votes, I think. So I'm sure the clerk will advise me if the bells begin to ring, because I'm not sure that I'll know. And then I'll seek unanimous consent to continue for as much, reasonable time to get us close to the time of the vote so we can hear more. We'll go now to the first round of questions. Mr. Williamson, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Minister Carty. It's very good to see you here tonight. I've got many questions here, so I'm going to get started right away. As you know, I'm a member of Parliament from New Brunswick, and I followed the headlines as they were happening in our province, as you and your government were moving to put some distance between the Institute, the Confucius Institute, and an education system. Could you tell me, I guess, first off the bat, what did you make of the lobbying effort, particularly from former Premier Sean Graham? And do you find that unusual, or are you concerned that this use of or employment of former politicians is pervasive across the country and could spread?
Well, certainly, thank you very much for the question. Certainly, based on my reading on the Confucius Institute and my studying of Chinese foreign policy operations, this has become reasonably standard, that there's an effort, first off, to start with a soft sell approach. Ironically, I think playing on Canada's growing awareness around issues of race and racism, and saying, oh, wait, how could you possibly question the motives of us, a poor developing country, trying to make our way in the world, and all we're seeking to do is to share love and harmony and understanding through dance, through language, through music. Underneath that, there's a harsher reality. And we've seen that harsher reality, of course, in the way that China has actually behaved. But specifically on your question, I didn't find it surprising. I did find it disappointing that a former premier would choose to present the views of a clearly hostile foreign power that has been actively engaged in suppressing its own citizens and also arbitrarily detaining Canadians, of course, as we're well aware. So I find it depressing, perhaps not surprising, but hopefully things can change. I'm always an optimist.
Yes, but unfortunately, recently we had former Premier McNeil in Nova Scotia lecturing Canadians about turning the other cheek when it comes to standing up for our values. Could you talk to us a little bit about the conversation you had with the Consul General to your office? And I think it's important to underscore just how bizarre and unusual China, which is normally very attuned to diplomatic niceties and protocol, for them to show up at your office unannounced, highly unusual. Could you talk to us a little bit about that meeting, that conversation, and if there's any follow-up subsequently to that in any other kind of venue with Chinese embassy officials?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Consul General from Montreal arrived, and Gather also had meetings with other ministers and made it quite clear that there could be economic consequences for any erosion of ties between the government of New Brunswick and China, including threats around lobster sales and a number of other specifics. But when in my conversation with him, it started off with he clearly hadn't done much background reading on where I'd come from, and I've just had a range of publications that are easily accessible online around China democracy issues ranging back about 15 years. And his first goal was to make it again sound as though this was simply a misunderstanding. And he repeatedly said, look, the way you should really come and allay any concerns you have is come and visit China. You can come, we'll be happy. We're going to show you around. We'll show you a great time. And you'll see that China is in fact a democratic country, which I expressed some surprise on hearing that. And basically continued along those lines. And there was a significant pushback when I made the point that you made in your line of questioning, saying that for a country that is routinely willing to, on the first instance, receiving any criticism, say that this is an interference in our internal affairs, in our domestic affairs, and violates the rights of national self-determination and the autonomy of the state. When I questioned how this didn't apply, he said, well, this is about schools. I said, well, that's odd because if this is about schools, then we were talking about lobsters as well. So there seems to be a little bit of a mixed message here. But that, again, didn't particularly surprise me because if you read the reports that have come from our own intelligence services, from the Australian government, from other democratic governments around the world, including some emergent democracies that are far further down the GDP list than we are, but are increasingly awake and aware to what China is up to, that this is part of the pattern. Is you start off with the soft sell, you start off with the all expense paid trips. And I don't think it's any coincidence that we see a large number of Western politicians suddenly parroting Beijing's line on a multitude of different issues, because most of those folks have taken advantage of Chinese hospitality. And then the next stage up from that is the veiled threat. Well, if you do this, then even though this is purely about education, inexplicably lobsters become part of New Brunswick's education system. And even though this has nothing to do with the Communist Party or the government, this is all about a very informal education exchange. Again, Beijing could be willing to make decisions around its economic relationship with Canada based on what happens here in New Brunswick. And so the efforts to threaten and cajole, I don't think they would have been acceptable from anyone else. And I can only imagine the horror with which most folks in Canada, myself included, would react if we ever had representatives of the American government behaving in a similar way. And I'm not surprised. This is part of a traditional pattern. But again, my hope is that through conversations like this, we can move to recognize the threat that China poses and move quickly to try and distance ourselves from a country that does not share our values.
One last quick question. I only got a few seconds left. You'll have a few seconds. What access did the Confucius Institute have to the data on students, private information, curriculum, things like that?
We had members of the Chinese Communist Party who were working for the Confucius Institute who have access to the databases and student information of New Brunswick students. And I heard about that from members of the Chinese diaspora, extremely concerned about that fact.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Williamson. We'll now go on to Ms. Yip for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you for coming to the committee to answer our questions. I read with great interest your biography. You have an interesting history. So despite your advocacy, the Confucius Institutes are still permitted in New Brunswick until next year. If this is so concerning, why not close them down now and not next year?
Well, because as I think all the members of this committee are well aware, that cabinet ministers don't make decisions unilaterally, nor do any individual members of a party or government. And I was very pleased that we were able to move immediately to end all of the Confucius Institute programming available to the younger years, and pending the end of the contract next June, to restrict the programming to a couple of courses based purely around language at the high school level, which I can assure you I've been monitoring closely to make sure that none of the efforts to censor or intimidate Canadian students is repeated, including particularly students of Chinese extraction.
How are you able to monitor their progress?
Well, because as you would expect from a foreign government managing programs inside a Canadian school, I certainly don't feel any compunction in making sure that I check in regularly to find out what's happening in those classrooms, as I think any responsible minister would, to make sure that if there were concerns raised about any sort of class, whether it was a curriculum area that was receiving particular controversy, you would make it your duty to make sure that you were up to speed on that issue.
What has the Chinese community in New Brunswick as parents talked to you about regarding the Confucius Institute? You mentioned that in your opening statements. Perhaps you could elaborate on that.
I can, and this is somewhat sad, that because many of them felt the need to communicate, in one case is to reach out to me and have a meeting off-site in an open area because they were afraid of being surveilled, and others using making it clear that they were using emails that they had registered specifically for the purpose of communicating with me, and a few who did just write to me directly. And they expressed real concerns about the potential impact on family back in China if they spoke out openly about the issues that they felt were definitely present with the Confucius Institute's programming. And they definitely felt censored, as you would expect from any citizen of a country that, again, routinely tortures and murders large numbers of its own citizens and has shown no compunction about extending that ill treatment towards citizens of other countries. And given Canada's not particularly strong record in standing up to that poor treatment, I can certainly understand the concern they have. And all I could do was to promise them that I would protect their confidentiality and do my very best to be a voice for the hundreds of millions of people in China who are desperate for change and desperate for the sort of freedoms that we enjoy every day.
What exactly was their concerns as parents? What did they raise towards you that made them so afraid?
That on a number of different bases. The first was educationally, that their students were being given misinformation, that subjects were being censored, information was being presented as fact that was not fact, and most of this material was not in the material that was supposed to be covered by the courses that the Confucius Institute and the New Brunswick government had agreed. Beyond that, concerns they had as either New Brunswick permanent residents or in some cases Canadian citizens who felt that if they spoke out in any way that could be linked back to them or their name, that there would be repercussions for their families back in China. And this is a concern that's been expressed in, again, a number of different government reports here and abroad about the increased influence of Beijing over members of the Chinese diaspora and efforts to try and mobilize and weaponize them, often against their will, to be agents of influence, and to do so in a way that, again, does not necessarily in any way reflect what they want to see, what they would like to do, or their beliefs or their politics. But when you have a government that behaves as Beijing does and enjoys the levels of impunity that that country continues to enjoy, then it's not surprising they continue to abuse their position on this and a multitude of other areas.
Can you share with this committee what type of analysis was done in the decision to shut down the Institute in New Brunswick?
Well, the analysis from my perspective was quite simple, which is that I do not and did not and would not tolerate supporting a program run by and managed by a foreign political party operating in our public school of 2018, and started conversations around this file nearly immediately. So that was very much one of my positions going into the job, and I moved quickly to accelerate the process of eliminating the Confucius Institute from New Brunswick public schools.
So there wasn't a study done to track maybe the different reasons why it should be shut down?
Absolutely. I did that research based on studies around the world on the Confucius Institute, which I'm sure that you and your committee have access to. And if not, I'd be very happy to provide a long list of links on that subject. That the number of those reports has grown exponentially since I began this conversation in 2018. So there is a huge body of evidence talking about why the Confucius Institutes are a danger to the countries in which they're located. And I used those as the basis for this for that decision. So there absolutely was an extensive study. It was done largely prior to my time as minister, and the evidence that I received afterwards from the way this program was operationalized in New Brunswick schools only confirmed my decision.
Maybe you could share with us. Oh, okay.
I think you're looking for written.
No, I'm just enjoying our conversation too much. Thank you.
Well, I'm afraid your time is up, but thank you very much. On procédera maintenant avec Madame. Excusez-moi, Monsieur.
Mr. Bergeron, 6 minutes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, time flies, as Mrs. Yip was saying. Thank you, Mr. Cardy, for being with us here today to testify. I see that you have the Acadian flag in your background, and I'm very pleased to see that. You can see I don't have the flag of France in the back of myself. It's the Acadian flag because I'm from Acadie myself. My ancestors are from Saint-Anne de la Rivière-Saint-Jean. And the British people built a Fredericton on the ruins of their former town. So it's a pleasure to see you here today. And in the beginning, I was quite surprised, actually, and surprised but pleased to see that a Minister of Education wanted to meet with us with regards to security issues around Canada-China relations. And I found this even more interesting that in testimony given last April 19th, Michel Genoux-Katsuya, former member of the SCRS, an expert in national security, told us that in New Brunswick, a former director of the Confucius Institute had to leave Canada following activities that resembled espionage. And then he added that he investigated on a file in New Brunswick where a former director had asked an employee of the provincial government to obtain an official email address for himself and to have access to information coming from the provincial government. Did you have access to this information when you made your decision to partially suspend right now and eventually completely suspend links between the government of New Brunswick, the school system in New Brunswick, and the Confucius Institute? Thank you for this question, Mr. Bergeron. To begin, thank you also for this Acadian solidarity. In my office, I can see actually Pointe-Saint-Anne from my office where the Acadian village was built. Yes, I can see that. Yes, my ancestors are. Yes, I'll say hello to your ancestors this evening. So, okay, hang on. So I did not have that information when I made the decision. As I said, my decision was based on concerns that came from my time as an elected member here in New Brunswick. Ever since the year 2000s, I've been convinced by looking at the evidence throughout the world, and I was living and working in near neighboring countries, more specifically Cambodia and Nepal, where the Chinese influence arrived rapidly and completely changed the political culture in these countries. I'm not exaggerating. This was just in a few months. It was very clear that the Beijing government was using a lot of these same tools in order to try to influence us. We cannot I mean, they see Canada as being a small country, rich in resources, but a very little population, and with foreign policy that is kind of weak, actually, to be polite about it. And it was in this context that I said, as a provincial politician, there's not that many things that I can do in this context, but when I look and that there's an operation controlled by the Communist Party of China operating in the schools of New Brunswick that is using propaganda in New Brunswick classrooms, well, I really was not comfortable with that. So I did everything in my power to eliminate this as quickly as possible. And I would like to. I would have liked to get rid of this last year. I mean, now we have to wait, and I'm looking forward to June 2022. Thank you, Mr. Minister. I'm hearing what you're saying, and I have to say that I found it quite interesting that Mr. Juinou Kaitsuya, during his testimony, was targeting New Brunswick specifically. And I was wondering if there was a link between the fact that he had identified specifically New Brunswick and the fact that a minister in New Brunswick had taken measures against the Confucius Institutes and had tried to meet the members of the committee with regards to Canada-Chinese relations, with regards to security. And during his testimony, this gentleman said that the Confucius Institutes were espionage satellites for the Chinese government. So according to what you've just said, you spoke about a propaganda vehicle in New Brunswick schools. But would you say that also within the province of New Brunswick, there are these are espionage satellites? Answer, well, I'm not going to contradict this gentleman and all the evidence that we see in other countries. This is the goal of the Confucius Institute is to have eyes on the Chinese community, in particular, to protect the interests of Beijing. And so I'm not going to contradict that at all. I'd like to come back on the statement made by former Premier Sean Graham, and he said that we weren't going to end a link with the Confucius Institutes simply to stop discussion about politics. Did you have the impression that politics were being discussed in classes given by the Confucius Institute? Discussions on politics were banned, even though the New Brunswick curriculum is based on the principle of multiculturalism, liberalism with a small L, of course. I'm sorry, but Mr. Bergeron's time is up. I'm like Mrs. Yip. I don't feel like I've had all my time, but I know that you are a wonderful timekeeper, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Greatly appreciated.
Mr. Harris for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister Cardy, for joining us tonight. I'm interested, you said that you started being concerned about this in 2018 when you became Minister of Education in New Brunswick. Was this a concern of yours for some time before that? And was there other action taken by you to either condemn the Confucius Institutes or make an issue of it?
No, I was only elected in 2018. I had previously, as my time in opposition, had raised the issue on several occasions, and again had become concerned about Chinese efforts to basically reverse engineer a tool that Canada used to great effect for a number of decades to use soft power against liberal democracies. So that becomes something I've been experiencing growing worry about, especially based on my time living in China's near abroad, in both in Cambodia and in Nepal, where Chinese influence went from significant but not determining to being dominant, to put it politely, in the space of less than a year in both occasions. And that's well documented, as any reading of the Nepali or Cambodian press would.
Sorry, all right. I'm kind of interested in New Brunswick, of course, because we're talking about something that's been going on. For how long in New Brunswick have the Confucius Institutes been active in New Brunswick?
2007.
And can you tell me how many schools do they play a role in your public school system?
They were in 2016 operating in 28 schools, and we have several hundred schools in the province. That number is down to 2 or 3 at the high school level with language-only classes.
And would they have also been operating in universities in New Brunswick as well?
I don't believe so, but that is a separate department here, so I can't answer that question with certainty. But in conversations with the Minister for Post-Secondary Education, Training and Labour here, he was not aware of any operations for the Confucius Institute. They didn't have a formal relationship. But it's worth noting that if you read the reports from multiple intelligence agencies across the democracies, that if you have a Confucius Institute presence, it often extends itself to look at a variety of areas that aren't necessarily part of people's day jobs. So in this case, in a town with several universities, I'm sure that was something where the Confucius Institute had an interest as well. But you'd have to ask them about that.
So are you telling us then that you based your decision to try to do away with the Confucius Institute not on what you knew about them operating in New Brunswick and what they did there, but on the overall, your knowledge of how they operated elsewhere? Am I right about that?
That would not be correct. I had previously, as I mentioned, in opposition, had raised the issue, and have written not widely on it, but a couple of articles that had received correspondence on the subject over the years of Chinese influence.
So you would have had people complaining to you about,
and I had people complaining. Okay. So I had both Chinese and non-Chinese Canadians complaining to me about the Confucius Institute operations.
And I take it then there was a formal relationship, some agreement with the government, the Department of Education that you were working on?
Yes, somewhat, but it was renewed in 2012 and 17, so prior to the election of the government of which I'm part. Somewhat bizarrely, the most recent renewal removed the ability for New Brunswick to withdraw from the contract. That clause was removed at China's request, and that request was acquiesced to by the Brian Gallant government, which is part of what led us to end up by having to run out the rest of this contract in a much more limited way in the high schools with the language courses because of that, the language used in that contract, which was also unprecedented in any of the international documents I have ever seen signed by any government, including ones with much lower capacity than you would expect the government of New Brunswick to have.
So do you have any idea how this would have started? Was there some sort of economic deal between the New Brunswick government and the Confucius Institute or China, Beijing, to sponsor these institutes? How did it come about?
There's a couple of folks who've had built connections between Canada, New Brunswick rather, and China over the last number of decades, and have opened up schools in China using New Brunswick curriculum, for example. And I highlight Dr. Francis Pang, who's been prominent in that, and he had introduced the opportunity for New Brunswick to host the Confucius Institutes back in 2007, and following that, there was an agreement signed in 2008, I believe it was, and the schools continued again until uninterrupted until 2018, and then were curtailed, as I've mentioned.
So am I right or wrong in assuming that it may have been thought to be benign when that was started?
I think so. And having talked to some of the people who were part of that original discussion, that was the point of high optimism around China and the idea that that liberalization of trade would result in liberalization of politics. And I can understand that. And I think that a lot of well-meaning Canadians in politics felt that was an appropriate path up until quite recently. But clearly, that's absolutely no longer the case. And I would argue probably we've been somewhat slower than we should have been in catching on to a serious change in Beijing's intentions towards the democracies over the last 15 years.
aside from the sort of development of this idea of exchange, was there a lot of interest in New Brunswick in China, or learning the Chinese languages and that sort of thing? Was that something that prompted it, or was that something that was just developed by as a matter of government policy?
I certainly have never heard of anyone having expressed strong desires for Chinese language programming, as much as I think that's an excellent idea. And one of my goals is to work with the government of China, Taiwan, to try and replace any programming that's lost because of the ending of our relationship with the Confucius Institutes with a country that will respect our democratic values. And we're already in those discussions, and I hope those will come to fruition very shortly.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Harris. On continuera maintenant avec le deuxième tour, Monsieur Paulus.
Second round, Mr. Paulus. Thank you. Hello, Mr. Cardy. Thank you for being here today. And first of all, I'd like to tell you that you're very courageous to having dared to come forward with these types of reforms. And I hope that elsewhere in Canada, people will open their eyes as to what's happening with these Confucius Institutes. And my first question, last March the 5th, the American Senate voted to refuse the funding of the Department of Education to universities that had Confucius Institute presidents. Do you think the federal government here should do the same? Answer, I think we need to make all possible actions to reduce the influence by Beijing in all our institutions and our policies and our politics or in our economy. Answer, that's really clear. Did you receive help from the federal government, either from the RCMP, when you decided to go ahead with this? And I imagine that, you had some threats with regards to the lobster industry, etc., but did you receive assistance from federal agencies? From the federal government, we have elected MPs well, I can't really make any specific comments to this effect. I can only speak for myself. With regards to other agencies, I did have discussions with CSIS to share the information because I worked for a decade in and so it was really strange to have a diplomat arrive and to exercise pressure on a provincial cabinet member without any representation from the federal government, from any. No, it's very strange. Exactly. Did you have any discussion with colleagues, ministers of education in other provinces in Quebec, for example, or elsewhere in Canada? Are any of your other colleagues asking questions, your counterparts? Yes, and I used a CNAG. It's the Alliance of the Ministers of Education in provinces and territories. And this year they adopted a proposal that came from New Brunswick in order to restrict academic contact with China, especially linked with what's happening with the Uyghurs, Hong Kong, religious minorities, people working for democracy in Hong Kong. And there's 1,000 reasons why we need to distance ourselves from China. I was pleased to have the support of CMEC. I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Williamson.
Mr. Cardy, you referenced soft power, but that's a bit of an understatement. When this debate was happening, I was hearing from constituents in New Brunswick Southwest, lobster sellers in particular, who were quite concerned about losing market access. Could you talk about the drama that was taking place, the threat that China was making, and how this is a soft power with an iron fist behind the glove?
Absolutely. And I think that, again, is very much in keeping with China's ability to play off some of Canada's political class's best instincts, a tendency to try and want to listen and to accommodate and to be reasonable. And in this case, on the one hand, you had friendly discussions around, well, think of the children, and why don't you come and visit China? And we can, as the Consul General said, you can see that China is also a democratic country, and that people who visit China come away transformed, which I'm sure they do. And then on the other hand, with other people in the same city passing on a very clear message of economic bribery. and making it very clear that what's being said in one room, that this is an education issue and has nothing to do with the economy, in another room is being seen as, you better get him under control, otherwise we're going to cost you tens of millions of dollars in lobster sales. I think that speaks for itself.
And could you talk to about the fallout? We've noted, we've seen in Australia where, despite the embargo, they've found new markets. Has there been an economic fallout in New Brunswick?
Lobster prices are, I believe, close to record highs at the moment. So come down to New Brunswick, enjoy our lobster rolls, and help protect democracy at the same time.
Very good. I think I'm out of time. I saw the chair, so I'll move on. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Mr. Carty.
Thank you, Mr. Williamson. On to Ms. Zan for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. And hello, Mr. Carty. It's been a while since we met, I believe, here. Nice to see you here in Nova Scotia when we were both members of the New Democratic Party. And I was a backbencher in the Darrell Dexter government who were actually making trips to China and increasing trade with China. And I'm just wondering, did you advise Mr. Darrell Dexter, the Premier then, that was not a good idea to do?
No, I don't recall having conversations at that point with Mr. Dexter. I think anyone who's in regular contact with me certainly knows my feelings on China and the need for Canada to disentangle ourselves from that government as quickly as possible. But I don't recall any specific conversations with Mr. Dexter on that subject.
Okay, because you were, of course, the leader of the NDP in New Brunswick at that time. And our lobster sales in Nova Scotia have also increased with China. In fact, I believe they are one of our largest buyers. So apparently, Premier Higgs was also concerned about jeopardizing New Brunswick exports to China because he said recently that the province would respect its contract with the Confucius Institute and keep the Beijing-funded program through to 2022. So have you had a chance to talk to him about that?
Well, yes, I believe I covered that in some of my earlier comments, that because the previous government under Premier Gallant signed a contract that removed the right of New Brunswick to cancel the contract. Again, something I have never seen in any contract, no matter how inept the lawyers involved happen to be, that seriously restricted our ability to finish the contract 100%. So what we did do was canceled all of the programs in nearly every single school and restricted it to a couple of high school-based language-only programs with careful attention to make sure that we no longer have students being disciplined for raising the Tiananmen Square massacre, other human rights abuses, and so on.
And so, of course, education is a provincial issue. So are you suggesting that all provinces should follow your lead and cancel Chinese language training?
No, I think that we should encourage Chinese language training. We just shouldn't use the Communist Party of China to be the language teachers.
Okay. And so in Australia, for instance, where I come from, Chinese language is very important. They're very much encouraging students to learn Chinese because, of course, China is such a big player on the world stage. What do you suggest going forward? I noticed that you said we need to play hardball, but a number of the people who've testified on this committee have said hardball doesn't necessarily work. You have to walk a fine line with China. What would you say to that?
Look at the 1930s.
Okay. Could you explain?
We have an aggressive regime that has no respect for any of the values that we hold dear, that suppresses democracy, that is currently incarcerating several million Muslims in concentration camps, forcibly sterilizing them, women being forced to take People's Liberation Army soldiers and members of the Chinese police force into their homes. And this isn't me saying this. These are all backed up by multiple reports internationally. Committing genocide, according to numerous international actors. If we're going to say that Canada has any moral authority in the world, at what point do we use it, if not against a country that behaves that way?
Mr.
And I'm all in favor. I'm all in favor of engaging with countries.
Thank you. Sorry,
that may be difficult, but I am not in favor of working with countries that behave as Beijing does.
Could I ask you another question? Are you considering a federal run, perhaps?
No, I'm not. I'm very happy where I am.
Okay, thank you very much. What about the National Democratic Institute, which is the U.S.-based democracy promotion agency? Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
I'm not sure what relevance it has to the hearing, but more than happy to.
Well, you worked there
the National Democracy Institute was founded in the early 80s in Washington, D.C. As part of 4 different non-governmental agencies, one linked to the U.S. Democratic Party, one to the U.S. Republican Party, one to the U.S. body representing organized labor, and one to a body broadly representing U.S. business interests. And the NDI would work in countries around the world, usually countries coming out of civil conflict, building new democracies. And my specialty in those areas was I would work on election-related programs, for example, training what we call scrutineers, what the Americans call polling agents, working with parties on internal party elections.
Latin American countries as well?
No, don't speak Spanish. I worked in Asia and Africa.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zan. Maintenant, on continue avec M. Bergeron pendant 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Mr. Bergeron, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Minister, once again. I would like to indicate that in an article published in La Presse in May 2013, it was said that in a secret report from 2006 with the Confucius Institute, CSIS writes that China wants that the world become enamored with everything Chinese. And then it said this soft power goes, it is a way to increase one's economic might. Is this something that you were aware of when you made the decision to break ties progressively with the Confucius Institute? Or is this information that you're learning today? Not directly, but this is something that you can find in many public reports written by many different agencies in democratic countries throughout the world. So it's not really a surprise because it reflects reality. Today, there's a large change, though, with the new regime under President Xi in Beijing. He even eliminated the transfer of power every decade, and this has existed since Mao. So when you see that even a dictator with one party and one leader can still remove measures to ensure complete power, this is concerning. And the actions of China gives reason for concern. When I look at foreign policy in the China Sea to the south, with their neighbors, with their own minorities, and we cannot have a conversation on this subject in the context of a discussion with parliamentarians here in Canada without mentioning Canadian citizens that are imprisoned for no legal reason. Yes. Has New Brunswick condemned or imposed any type? Have you suffered economic reprisals with the fact that, because of the fact that you've cut ties? I don't know. In New Brunswick, we're a small province. I hope that our action can inspire others, and I hope the government of Canada also should take action. But I don't think we'll have many consequences. Your time is up, Mr. Bergeron.
To Mr. Harris for 2 minutes and 30 seconds, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Carty, in our province, in Newfoundland and Labrador, and I suspect most provinces, the Department of Education takes a very close scrutiny and control over curriculum and materials and what's taught particularly in the public schools of the province. Was that the case in New Brunswick? And did they miss something, or did they not have any control over what the Confucius Institute program was offering to the students in New Brunswick?
There was a level of control that was supposed to be in place, but it was the standards weren't lived up to, which is how we ended up by having elementary school students being told that Taiwan was just another part of China. So I think there was a little bit of overconfidence, I think, in terms of expecting China to live up to their side of the bargain.
And so did this gradually get into the curriculum, or did this something that just started off with the curriculum doing all of the things that you have been complaining about in terms of how they dealt with students and how they disciplined them, for example, for bringing up Tiananmen Square?
Well, those were only in the context of the classes which the Confucius Institute teachers were offering. And it's a good moment to note something I didn't say earlier, that when the Consul General came to visit me, he was accompanied by a translator. And after saying the Confucius Institute had absolutely nothing to do with the Chinese Communist Party or the government of China, it turned out that the translator who was with him was a Confucius Institute teacher. But that again, it never at any point was I made aware of those teachers or any agents of the government of China acting outside of those classes in those schools.
So did you have any trouble convincing your cabinet colleagues to support your decision to rid the province of the Confucius Institutes?
I can't speak about what happens in cabinet.
But it still took several years to do.
It took a couple of months after my government was elected. We were elected in September of 2018, took power in November of 2018, and began to prepare this effort later in November of 2018.
Do you have any plans, Mr. Cardy, to ensure that there is some Chinese language programming available in the province of New Brunswick at either high school or the university level to provide the kind of alternatives that it's been urged upon us by several witnesses, by the way, particularly to protect the Chinese people in Canada?
Absolutely. And we've been working with the representatives from the Republic of China, Taiwan, who have an astonishingly high quality educational exchange program that I'd encourage everyone to look into.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. And now we go to Mr. Jennis for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just before I start my questions on a point of order, it looks like the House is about to start bells. So can we maybe pass a motion to give us 15 minutes here so that we don't have to be interrupted?
I think what I would need is unanimous consent for that, right? So yeah. I'm seeking unanimous consent for us to continue for 15 more minutes. I'm assuming it's a 30-minute bell.
Yes.
When the bells start ringing. Is there unanimous consent?
No.
Okay, thank you. There's no unanimous consent. Mr. Jennis, please begin.
Bells are ringing now.
The bells are ringing.
Could I seek unanimous consent for 10 minutes?
Point of order, the bells are ringing. No.
5 minutes?
No.
I have to.
You don't want to hear from the minister for 5. You need half an hour to get. Come on, Rob. Like this is incredibly rude to the minister.
Mr. Jennis, I'm sorry. The rules compel me to suspend the meeting.
Well,
Mr. Minister, I very much very much appreciate your testimony. Good to see a fellow Maritimer. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the members of the committee.
you.